Autistic Tony Stark by ajexists. Fic 2. The past, the present, the same. Past. Rhodey walked into his dorm and heard a loud bang. With a sigh, he set his stuff down and walked around to find his roommate. His roommate, the infamous Tony Stark. When he saw the 15-year-old with his father on their move-in day, his first feeling was being starstruck. He may not have been the biggest fan of Starks, but anyone would be thrown off when you're standing next to the richest person in the world and his son is your roommate. That feeling of being starstruck quickly changed to annoyance. Who thought that having a 15-year-old go to college was a good idea? The kid was snobby, rude, incredibly egotistical, never looked someone in the eye. He had come back to the kid drunk on more than one occasion. He swore he's never seen that kid sleep, at least not intentionally. He's always surrounded by textbooks, documents, scrap metals, and tools of all sorts. Tony clearly needed some growing up to do, or live in the real world and see how the common folk live. Rhodey tried to be nice, though, more so because his ma would kill him otherwise. As his mother kindly said over the phone one night, "Rich people are assholes. All he knows is how to be an asshole. Show him not how everyone is like that. If he doesn't take the hint, then fuck it. I'll take care of him myself." Boy, did that turn out to be ironic. Anyway, Rhodey walked into their shared bedroom space and saw Tony on his bed, once again surrounded by papers and books. This time, however, his eyes were closed and he continuously leaned back to bang his head against the wall. Rhodey raised an eyebrow. "That must really be hurting. I heard you from our entrance." Tony jumped and jerked his head over to the voice. Seeing his roommate, he sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I thought you had class." "Just came back." That's another thing he noticed. Tony never knew what time it was, or more accurately, how much time had passed. "What you working on?" Tony groaned and leaned his head back. "Everything." "Everything?" Tony groaned again and started to ramble. "I got homework for design of electromechanical robotic systems and design and manufacturing due this Friday. American history due next Tuesday, which is the same day I have my English project due. I could have gotten that done a couple weeks ago, but Howard needed me to design something for SI. Rhodey grimaced at that. His father does know that college is a lot of work, right? Which I am behind on, so I really need to get this done first. But of course I'm stuck, which is fucking perfect, even though I know this equation. I just can't seem to fucking... Tony groaned again and went back to banging his head. Hey, calm down. Hurting yourself is going to get you nowhere." Rhodey walked towards the bed. "How about we take a break, yeah?" "No, you don't understand," Tony yelled out, his voice cracking as he barely reached puberty. "All of this work is due very soon, and I'm already late with this design, and I don't want him any more mad at me, so I need to do it now." Rhodey sighed. "Tony, you're super worked up and overwhelmed. Take a breather." Tony took a quick and shallow breath, and then glared at Rhodey. "Happy?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Well, what if I don't?" Tony grumbled, now starting to punch himself in the leg. Okay. How about I help you? I'm in MIT for a reason too. Maybe I could help figure it out. Rhodey waited for a response and eventually got a small nod. Tony sat there hitting his leg, so Rhodey took initiative and moved a couple of the papers over so he had a space to sit on the bed. "What are you doing?" Tony's sheer volume made Rhodey jump and drop a couple of the papers. He looked over at him with shock and slight annoyance. "I thought you wanted me to help you." "Yes, but you don't just..." Tony pulled on his hair. "Those are my papers." "Again? You wanted my help? I needed the space to see what you're doing," Rhodey explained with a stern tone. His annoyance was rising. This kid was freaking out over nothing. "You don't touch other people's shit!" His shouting was getting louder. He stopped pulling on his hair to now hitting his head. His annoyance was now reaching a boiling point. Fine, whatever. I won't touch your shit again. Rhodey sighed and went to grab Tony's hands. Now please stop hitting. Soon as Rhodey's hands touched his, Tony jumped away and screamed, Don't touch me! He broke down into sobs, his punching became harder, and he started rocking. The annoyance Rhodey felt disappeared in an instant, now taken over by concern. First he thought Tony was just having a tantrum, throwing a fit over something small. This looked worse. Way worse. Maybe he was just that overwhelmed. But he's been overwhelmed by work before, and he's never reacted like this. After a few seconds of shock, his brain finally processes that Tony Stark is punching himself, and gets up to grab his pillow. Tony's is closer, but he doesn't want to potentially make things worse. He hands over the pillow to Tony and says, Pones, hit this, please. I don't want you hurting yourself. Tony does hit it a couple of times, pulls it up to his mouth to scream, then puts the pillow against his chest to hug while he continuously rocks and sobs. Rhodey sat there staring at him, feeling helpless. He didn't know what to do, how to help. Part of him wishes his ma was there, but she tended to use a lot of hugs, so maybe not. He sighed and got up to do things that could help him afterwards. He turned off the overhead light, keeping on the lamp that was between their bedside tables to see. Also helped that it was still daytime, so light peeked through the curtains. He got a glass of water and some Tylenol for the headache he was most certainly going to have. Rhodey came back and set the stuff on the bedside table, carefully sat back on the bed, and waited. After what seemed like half an hour, Tony finally began to calm down. His breathing slowed, the sobbing stopped along with the rocking, and now he looked exhausted. Rhodey grabbed the Tylenol and water, handing them over to Tony. Take that, it should help. It took a minute, but eventually Tony put the pill in his mouth and drank the water. He passed the water back over to Rhodey, manoeuvred around so he could grab his blanket and wrap it around his shoulders, hiding his face in the pillow that he was still holding. After he set the glass back down, he watched Tony in silence. He didn't know what to say, what to do. Eventually he asked, What was that? Tony simply shrugged. Rhodey waited for more, but Tony remained silent. He sighed. Look, man, you gotta talk to me. Tony quickly shook his head, looking up to show a pained face. Rhodey frowned. He was all red and blotchy. You could see the tear stains on him. Rhodey took a deep breath and asked, Is that head shaking because you don't want to talk? Tony's head shook again. Or because you can't talk? Rhodey asked slowly. There was a pause, then eventually Tony nodded, tightening his hold on the pillow. Okay, all right, that's fine, Rhodey nodded. Is it okay to touch you now? Instead of nodding or shaking his head, Tony moved over so he was sitting next to and leaning against Rhodey. He wrapped his arms around the kid and rubbed up and down his back. They sat like that for another 10 or so minutes. Tony glanced up at Rhodey and whispered, Thank you. He gave him a small smile. Rhodey squeezed his shoulders, smiling back. Of course. The present. It was rare for Tony to ask him to come over. It was more the case that Rhodey would call a couple days ahead of time to let him know he was arriving. The first time, though, he just surprised him, but he could tell Tony felt off the rest of the visit. But Tony called, said he had something to tell him, and hung up. Well, that didn't make him panic at all, and when he tried to call back, it all went to voicemail. Although he supposes he did receive a text 2 hours later saying, It's a good thing, I promise. One of these days Rhodey's gonna kill him, swear to God. He arrived at the tower and headed straight down to the lab, knowing that's where he would be. And sure enough, there he was, tinkering away at some tech. Rhodey walked over and knocked on the table. Tony jumped a little and turned. Seeing Rhodey made him smile. Honey Bear, you're here. Rhodey chuckled and sat down in the chair next to Tony. You say that like you didn't specifically ask for me to be here. And next time, let me know if what you're telling me is good news or bad news immediately. I've had too many close calls with you. Yeah, sorry about that. He ran his hands through his hair. I didn't realize how it sounded until I told Pepper about it later, and she told me to clarify it. Huh, that's interesting. So Pepper already knows? Knows? Oh yeah, she knows. Rhodey hummed and watched Tony tinker some more. So, are you going to tell me? Hmm? Oh, yeah, I am. Tony took a deep breath. So you know the kid? Rhodey raised an eyebrow. Your intern? Peter. Yeah, Peter. Tony set his stuff down and took another deep breath. So a couple of weeks ago, he came into the lab and told me that he's autistic. Rhodey's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. And because I knew jack shit about it, he asked me to research. Let me guess, you spend the rest of the night researching and found out some shit? Rhodey asked. Tony looked down and nodded. I've never. It all makes sense. I've never understood myself more than I did that night. It explained. Fuck. It explained everything. The movements I do, it's called stimming, and the reason I'm so into engineering is because they are my special interests, and I get super hyper focused on topics, which makes me forget to eat, drink, and sleep. I have sensory issues, which is why I like to wear sunglasses, and the meltdowns. At that, Rhodey leaned back, thinking back on his own. So that day in college, he interrupted. Tony stopped and looked over at Rhodey as he said, the first time you had one of your outbursts in front of me, that was a meltdown. Tony bit his lip and nodded. I was overwhelmed with work, overwhelmed in general, and you moved my stuff, which to me and my already chaotic mind made it even more chaotic. Plus, you touched me afterward, which... big no-no. Yeah, I've learnt that. Rhodey smiled. He reached out and patted his shoulder, giving it a squeeze. I'm happy you found this out, man. Tony smiled. Yeah, me too. It's taking me some time getting used to it, like what it all means and everything. But I'm just glad I finally have something that explains me. Rhodey nodded, leaning back against the chair. That's understandable. You planning on getting diagnosed? Tony nodded. Yeah, Pep and I are looking for a specialist. What about after? After what? You get diagnosed. You're officially autistic. Is that going to stay a secret, or do you plan on telling the world? Tony let out a shaky breath. Honestly, I don't know. I don't want to think about that right now. Rhodey nodded. I get it. But remember, Tony, you're a very public figure. So even if you could try to keep it private, someone could... I said I don't want to think about it right now, Tony sternly interrupted, taking deep breaths not to let the panic rise. I'm sorry. Rhodey apologized and stood up, opening his arms for a hug. Tony got up and hugged him, nestling in his neck. The two of them casually swayed side to side, both now knowing this was a stim. Rhodey held him tight and rubbed his back. No matter what you do or what happens, I'll be here, okay? I love you, Tones. Love you too, Rhodes. The two stayed hugging and swaying like that for a few more minutes. Eventually, Tony broke up the hug and started rambling about the current project he was working on. Rhodey couldn't help but smile. He looked happier. He showed his happiness more. He had a feeling this new discovery within Tony would make things a lot better. The same. If he was being honest, Rhodey had a moment of thinking that Tony would be completely different. He started having this thought after Tony explained what masking was, hiding your autistic traits. Tony's been doing that for years. How much of him was him, and how much of him is made up? He didn't have to worry much, though. Turns out Tony's true self was part of Tony he used to rarely see. The two decided on a whim to build a robot, a small one, like the ones they used to make their first year in robotics class. It took them 3 days to build their little friend, which they decided to name Little Friend. They were laughing and having fun the whole time. It was like they were back to their first year of college, second semester, robotic class partners. The moment of truth. The moment of truth. Time to turn on their robot, Little Friend. See if he works. Time to turn on their robot, Dummy. See if he works. Tony walks over to the robot, flips a switch. Tony walks over to the robot, flips a switch. It works. Little Friend starts beeping, moving around on the lab table, picking up objects and bringing them over to Rhodey. Dummy starts beeping, moving around the lab room, picking up objects and bringing them to Rhodey. Tony squeals. He jumps up and down, clapping his hands. Pure joy. Rhodey smiles at Tony, finding this side of him incredibly endearing. Rhodey smiles at Tony, incredibly happy to see this side of him. In that moment he realised this. This is who his best friend is. His masking tried to hide this. Quite frankly, he's happy Tony discovered this part of himself, his true self. Because this right here is him, his genius friend who gets robots. He looked back at Rhodey, a smile still on his face, yet he tilts his head. What's that look for? Rhodey patted him on the back. I'm just happy you found yourself, Tones. Tony chuckled and nodded, wrapping an arm around his shoulder. Yeah, me too.